When faced with the ultimate betrayal from someone you love, does loyalty have a price? And what do you do when the person you trusted most in the world uses their final breath not to say goodbye, but to burn your entire life to the ground? My best friend Sarah sat beside me, her hand an absolute block of ice in mine. Across the polished mahogany table, her family, or what was left of it, wore masks of polite grief. But their eyes, sharp and hungry, glittered with greed. They were vultures circling, so sure they knew what was in that will. For 2 weeks, they had been carving up a lifetime of work before the man who built it was even cold. They thought the war was over, but they hadn't accounted for the man who wrote the will, or the secrets he'd kept for 20 years. None of us could have prepared for the single sentence that was about to prove that wealth doesn't just divide families, it digs graves where love once lived. A sentence that would expose a betrayal so vast it would swallow their entire world and burn their lives to the ground. To understand the explosion, you have to understand the man who lit the fuse. Richard Davenport was a titan. He filled every room with a sheer, buzzing life force and had a laugh that boomed from his chest, making you feel like the only person on earth. I'd known him since I was 10. He was a second father. I remember the smell of his pipe tobacco and the quiet mornings before school when he'd patiently braid Sarah's hair, his large, clumsy fingers surprisingly gentle. He saved every crayon drawing she ever made. After her bike was stolen, he spent a whole weekend building her a new one by hand, its cherry red paint still slightly tacky. He was, for her, the sun. Sarah was his only child from his first marriage to Clara, a lovely artist who died of cancer when Sarah was just a teen. Sarah inherited her mother's quiet grace, making her seem like a fragile bird in a house full of peacocks, especially after Richard remarried. Eleanor, the stepmother, was Richard's opposite. Where he was warm, she was ice. Where he was generous, she was transactional. She and her 2 children, Gregory and Beatrice, swept into their lives 5 years after Clara's death. Instantly, the home that once smelled of fresh flowers and Sunday roasts began to reek of Eleanor's sharp perfume. Fading photographs of Clara were moved to a dusty back hallway. Mirrors that had once reflected her smile were covered, and the heirloom china was replaced with sterile modern plates. Laughter was replaced by the tense, formal silence of ticking clocks. Gregory and Beatrice, a few years our senior, treated Sarah with amused condescension, a quaint relic from a past life. They saw her profound love for her dad not as a bond, but as a weakness to be exploited. They produced nothing but expected everything, their lives built on the assumption that one day Richard's empire would be theirs. But Richard's greatest secret wasn't just a weakness for a new woman, it was cowardice, and it had been festering for 2 decades, about to explode. The call came on a Tuesday, a massive, out-of-the-blue heart attack. 1 minute, Richard was closing a deal. The next, at 68, the Titan was gone. Sarah's grief was a raw, physical thing that hollowed her out. I moved into her apartment, bringing soup she wouldn't eat. Late one night, I found her in his study, not crying, but just holding his old fountain pen, its cold weight in her hand, as if trying to absorb the last trace of him through the one thing that recorded his life. Her childhood home had become enemy territory overnight. Eleanor's grief was a masterful public performance. She dabbed at bone-dry eyes with a silk handkerchief, but less than 48 hours after Richard died, I overheard her on the phone with a real estate agent, inquiring about the market value of their Aspen vacation home. Gregory and Beatrice were even worse, carrion birds tearing at a legacy. At the wake, Gregory wasn't mourning. He was taking inventory, his eyes scanning the priceless art on the walls with a calculator's precision, his hands lingering on the frames like a thief in waiting. Beatrice was already planning to turn Sarah's mother's art studio, a space Richard had kept untouched for 20 years, into a home gym. They were measuring for drapes while the sympathy casseroles were still warm. Sarah thought the wake was the worst of it. She was wrong. A week later, the call came from Richard's lawyer, Howard Davies. A dramatic reading of the will is mostly a Hollywood invention, but Eleanor wanted her drama. She insisted on a formal reading, an audience for her coronation. She wanted to watch Sarah's face as her irrelevance was read into the legal record. Mr. Davies reluctantly agreed, setting the stage for a tragedy. He had no idea the script was about to be flipped on them all. And so, there we were. The office of Davies, and Finch smelled of old money, power, and the suffocating tension of a coming storm. Sarah was a ghost in a simple black dress. I felt like her bodyguard, her emotional shield, completely unaware of how useless I was about to be. Eleanor, Gregory, and Beatrice arrived, a united front of smug certainty. Eleanor, in a charcoal suit and a massive pearl necklace, looked less like a widow and more like a CEO announcing record profits. "Sarah, darling," she began, her voice smooth as venom. "So good of you to come. I know how difficult this must be. It was something you'd say to a mailroom clerk." Gregory smirked. "Don't worry, Sarah. I'm sure Father left you a little something. Your art supplies are probably safe." Beatrice glanced up from her phone, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Maybe he left you that old station wagon. You always did love that ghastly thing." They were so sure of the meal they were about to have. They believed their constant presence had translated into legal power, that the will would simply confirm they were the center of Richard's universe. I squeezed Sarah's hand. "Just breathe," I whispered. "It'll be over soon." I have never been more wrong in my entire life. Mr. Davies entered, a man in his late 70s with a kind face etched by the worries of others. He carried a single thick document. His eyes lingered on Sarah for a moment with what I now recognize as pity. He sat, placed the document on the table, and the show was about to begin. Mr. Davies cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. We are here to review the last will and testament of Richard Michael Davenport. I want to preface this by saying Richard was very specific. He reviewed this document with me less than 6 months ago. It is legally sound." Eleanor gave a tight, satisfied nod. "Get on with it." He droned through minor bequests, a donation, a watch, a sum to his assistant. With each item, the Step family's impatience grew. "And now," Mr. Davies said, adjusting his glasses, "we come to the disposition of the main estate, including all property, stocks, liquid assets, and controlling interest in Davenport Industries." This was it. Gregory leaned forward. Eleanor sat perfectly still, a marble statue of victory. The air itself seemed to vanish. The clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. All of the aforementioned assets, he read, his voice steady, are to be placed into a newly formed trust. The net income and principal to be divided into 3 equal shares for the benefit of my beloved children. 3. Shares. Eleanor's face tightened. Unfair, they thought, but expected. Sarah, Gregory, and Beatrice. But Mr. Davies wasn't done. He kept reading the sentence that would detonate their world. For the benefit of my beloved children, my daughter, Sarah Davenport. He paused. My son, Leo Martinez. The name hung in the air. Leo Martinez? Sarah and I exchanged a look of pure confusion. Eleanor let out a sharp, ugly laugh. Howard, you must have misread that. A typo, surely. Mr. Davies's voice became a death knell. And the remainder of my estate, including the primary residence, I leave with my deepest and most sincere apologies for a lifetime of cowardice to the only woman I have ever truly loved, the mother of my son, Miss Sophia Martinez. The silence shattered into a cacophony of overlapping voices. Eleanor's shriek, Gregory's roar, Beatrice's sudden gasp. A chair scraped violently against the floor. The air, once just tense, was now a suffocating cloud of expensive perfume and the acrid smell of panicked sweat. What? Eleanor shrieked, shooting to her feet. That's impossible. It's a forgery. Who the hell are Leo and Sophia Martinez? Gregory roared, his face a mottled red. It was then I noticed them, tucked in a corner of the room, a woman and a teenage boy. The woman, Sophia, was beautiful, with eyes that held a universe of sorrow. The boy, Leo, was maybe 17, and when I saw him, my blood ran cold. He had Richard Davenport's eyes. He was Richard's son. Eleanor followed my gaze. When she saw them, her face twisted into a mask of pure hatred. You, she spat. Who are you? Sophia Martinez stood, graceful and composed. My name is Sophia Martinez. This is my son, Leo. Richard was a part of our lives for 20 years. 20 years. The timeline was a staggering tapestry of deceit. While he was married to Clara, while he was raising Sarah, while building a new life with Eleanor. This will didn't just threaten their inheritance, it erased their entire story. The office descended into primal fury. Eleanor's screams at Mr. Davies were shrill, echoing off the wood-paneled walls. Gregory was on his phone, yelling at his lawyer, shouting fraud and contest the will. Beatrice collapsed into her chair, sobbing for the fortune she now had to share. Through it all, Sophia and Leo were a silent island of dignity, watching the ugly spectacle they had likely spent a lifetime dreading. Sarah was in total shock. Her son, the man she adored, was a stranger. Her grief was now hopelessly tangled with betrayal. Was her whole life a lie? I had to get her out. As I helped her up, Eleanor turned her fury on her. You, she hissed, her face inches from Sarah's. Did you know about this? Were you in on his filthy little secret? Before Sarah could even flinch, I stepped between them. Back off, Eleanor. Look at her. She's as blindsided as you are. As I guided Sarah out into the bright, indifferent afternoon, the new reality set in. Contesting a will is a declaration of legal war, a grueling, expensive process that shreds families. Legal filings began arriving at her door like funeral notices for her own memories. Each subpoena felt like a dagger aimed at the heart of her family's story. The war had begun. The following months were a horror story played out in cold legal boxes and under fluorescent lights, turning a lifetime of love into paper trails. The estate's assets were frozen, grinding Eleanor, Gregory, and Beatrice's lavish lifestyles to a halt. We heard stories. Gregory being ridiculed at his exclusive club after trying to put drinks on his frozen account. Beatrice, mortified, seen pawning her mother's jewelry in a dingy shop miles from home. Eleanor, once the queen of charity galas, was now met with polite, cold shoulders. Their outrage was exceeded only by their panic. For Sarah, it was a different kind of hell. The discovery process was brutal, forcing her to relive her father's betrayal. We learned the truth in painful pieces. Sophia was a landscape architect Richard had loved for 2 decades. Leo had grown up knowing he had a father he could never claim, a man he saw only from a distance, wondering about the sister who lived in the light while he was kept in the shadows. Richard wasn't a monster, but a coward, and his will was his final, messy confession. The depositions were interrogations. I sat with Sarah as Eleanor's lawyers grilled Sophia for hours, trying to paint her as a gold digger. When they questioned Sarah, they were merciless. It was then that something inside her snapped. The lawyer sneered. "Isn't it true your father paid for everything, that you were entirely dependent on him?" Sarah leaned forward, her voice low and clear, commanding the room. "My father gave me his love. You wouldn't understand. It's not something you can put a price on or contest in court." The fragile girl who entered that room was burned away in the fire of betrayal. What stood in her place was a survivor. It was a generational truth many women come to know. Betrayal hardens, but survival dignifies. It was her mother's grace, living on. The turning point was the DNA test. It confirmed with 99.9% certainty that Leo Martinez was Richard Davenport's son. The fact blew a hole through Eleanor's case. Desperation escalated. Gregory was caught trying to bribe a former employee. Beatrice, served an eviction notice, was seen packing designer dresses into black trash bags on the curb. They were burning down their own house just to spite the neighbors. The end came not in court, but in a quiet settlement meeting nearly 2 years later. Facing a mountain of evidence and astronomical costs, Eleanor's lawyers advised her to surrender. The Davenport Legacy Trust was executed as written. Sarah, now a quiet warrior forged in legal fire, received her third. Leo, a young man forced to prove his own existence, received his. And Sophia got the house and the security Richard had promised. Eleanor, Gregory, and Beatrice were left with the bitter ashes of their pride. After legal fees, their share was massively diminished. Gregory took a humiliating sales job. Beatrice moved back home. The step family, once so powerful, simply faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. The war was over, but the wreckage remained. 6 months later, Sarah reached out to Sophia and Leo. They met for coffee, 3 survivors of the same shipwreck. As they shared memories of the complicated, flawed man they had all loved and been hurt by, Sarah reached across the table and slid her father's old fountain pen, the one she'd clung to in his study, toward Leo. A fragile peace began to grow. They weren't the family Richard had planned, but they were the one he left behind. I watched it all happen, from that first day suffocating in the stale air of betrayal to that quiet coffee shop where the fresh air felt like a release. An inheritance isn't just about money, it's the final story someone tells about their life. Richard's story was a tragedy of cowardice, but in the end, it was also about a painful, complicated, and ultimately resilient form of love. The money left scars, but the choice to heal was theirs, and that was the only inheritance that truly mattered. If money can tear apart even the closest families, what chance does love alone have? I'd be interested to hear your story in the comments below. And for more stories about how fortunes are made, lost, and the lives they change forever, make sure you subscribe. Watch this next for another jaw-dropping tale of greed, betrayal, and revenge you won't see coming.